The impact of the pandemic in the oil and gas sector was a very hefty one. When the pandemic kicked in January 2019, no one ever thought the world was as connected as the spread of COVID-19, and nobody was prepared for that, including the oil and gas sector. So by March, when the contagion has gone and spread all over the world, including most African countries like Nigeria, the oil and gas sector, which is 90% of the foreign exchange earnings of Nigeria, got hit badly because we all went into a panic state. One, we didn't know what to do. Two, we didn't understand the pandemic itself. So we were thinking more, how do we safeguard our people operationally on the field? As you know, the oil and gas business is more operational, above ground operations in keeping the oil pumping. So which means people, you're going to have tool pushers, you're going to have mechanics working in physical. So protecting those people was very prime and important to us. Secondly is the oil and gas sector works in a routinous mode, which means 28 days on, 2 weeks off. So we hit another snag because we had people, when the pandemic hit, that were running their own shift of 28 days. Then the pandemic hit, we didn't know what to do if we were going to let those people go. How do we get new people in? They might infect the others. So we were working with government. NNPC was fantastic. All the oil companies through IPPG, which is the union or the partnership of all the independent producers, got together and we tried to fashion out an operating model that would safeguard the industry, keep oil pumping, but more importantly, keep our people safe. And what we did was we left the people on there. So the people that were on 28-day shift when it hit in March were on for like 2 months working till we worked out a model where the next people coming on shift came in 2 weeks early. We get them tested, we put them up in hotels, then they start replacing the people that have been in on the facilities. So it was a very, very tough one and a tough time for the industry. What even made it worse was the global slump in prices, because consumption of oil globally dipped, aircrafts were not flying, trains were not running, and oil prices, we saw oil prices at the lowest I've ever seen it in my career in oil and gas. I know April 14th last year, we sold a cargo of oil at $14.63, where we have cost of production at over $27. So it was a terrible and torrid time for the industry. But the true position is we weathered the storm by first trying to beat the pandemic, keeping our people safe, and more importantly, being able to work in tandem with government and the NCDC in making sure we did not turn off the valve. The pandemic is a huge wake-up call to oil economies like Nigeria that's solely dependent on oil as their main source of foreign exchange. There's no better time for thinkers or people, leaders who are running government, who are running countries, to have a proper rethink on being not only energy sufficient, but being able to diversify the core of your economy. The impact net zero would have on economies, more so economies that are energy dependent, production of energy, like Nigeria again, it's a huge one. I think one of the things I said during the COP26, and I said again in Paris last week, is this: African leaders needs to come to the table. They need to come to the table with their own ideas, but the principal idea is the safety of their own countries and their people. We cannot have a one-size-fits-all emission policy. I'll give you an example. Africa only contributed about 1.5% of global emissions. So we're not United States or China or India. So why are we being called to the table and given the same net zero positioning and time frame? Remember, the OECD countries, the first world countries, they've gone through their first industrial revolution, second, third. They're now going after their fourth industrial revolution, right? But Africa, we have not even had our first. So these guys have used coal, they've used all sorts of dirty fuels. And all of a sudden, they're trying to get us to negotiate on the same terms. That would be unfair. You know what's going to happen? Africa, with a population of about 1.2 billion people, where 60% is under the age of 30, we'll see riots on the streets of Africa when if this happens. You know why? Because we're not prepared for it. So we cannot be tied to the same norms and standards as the Western world. Africa does not even have enough electricity, be it from any dirty fuel. And yet you're trying to tell me I should go to net zero renewables, solar, wind. But we're blessed with abundant gas. So we need to think, African leadership needs to come to the table. Transition fuels should be our first point of call. Let's use the gas, energize and create industrial output and base, creating jobs for our people. Then we can come to the table negotiating on standard terms that works for all. A good working relationship between African oil producers or African energy producers, countries that are dependent on energy producers, and the global emission standards that's been brought to the table should be one of equal partnership. Should be one that we think of what suits us as a people, not what suits them, be it the Europeans or the Americans. Look, I saw something funny I said last week in Paris. It was strange. There was an article 2 months ago in California where they're pushing this agenda, net zero. And it's just bizarre. They had this electric charging stations in California. And the charging stations in remote location, they have to come to recharge the charging station. And guess what was charging the charging station? A generator, diesel generator on a truck, charging a charging station to give electrical output. Very odd. And you're trying to bring me to work within your own standard framework. So for me, what is missing always when it comes to Africa is leadership. Leadership of conscience that thinks out of the box. Think of our people and our survival and how we will be brought to book on our own standards and norms. Look, don't get me wrong. Global emission standards needs to come down. But we only contribute 1.5%. So let's work that reduction based on our own growth strategy and our energy requirements, but taking into cognizance of global norms. That's the way forward. COP26 outlook is actually done a big favor to oil producers, because you've seen what's happened to oil prices. Right? Decarbonization is a big thing, and it's a big mantra that's been thrown out there. But what has happened? Post-pandemic, people are flying and traveling again. Vaccinations going on, industries are opening again. And demand for oil is increased, demand for energy is increased. But remember, the last 2 years, during the pandemic, oil companies were not investing money. They were only run and maintain current production. And in the oil industry, there's what they call a natural decline curve of between 4 to 5% a year. So let's assume the last 2 years, global production declined 10%. Now you see where the problem is. Demand is surging again, factories are opening again, people are traveling again, airports are opening again, industrial output is opening again. Of course, naturally, we're not far away from $100 oil. My advice to government in trying to entice and keep investors in the oil and gas and energy space is by first giving the right incentives and support to making sure they see the opportunities and the opportunities has value for them. Look, Africa has and requires a lot of investment, more so in the energy space and the value chain. And when governments give the right incentives and tax breaks, it only helps grow the sector and keep interest of investors coming in. My take about the host community percentage that was agreed in the PIA, the Petroleum Industry Act, is this. As an industry practitioner, even 20% is not too much. But the true position is this. As a nation where we have a collective mandate to our natural resources, that's the same money that funds everything. So for the host community to get 3%, but 3% gross of the entire bill in that community, I think is magnificent. So let me give you an example how big this is. If you have a community where you have 50,000 people and that community is processing or producing 30,000 barrels a day, that is a budget for that community of $1 billion. That community gets 3% of $1 billion. That's huge. If managed well by the community, if the money is spent properly, everyone wins. And that, for me, is got to be win-win. Government wins, community wins, and the companies themselves actually win. You cannot displease the companies, and community only makes money. You'll find no one to invest. You cannot displease government, so it's got to work in tandem that everybody wins. For the oil and gas industry to slow climate change means a couple of things got to happen. The focus on the type of resources that are explored and exploited needs to change, but that's where technology and innovation comes into play. If technology and innovation is at play, it will improve the emission standards in time. And that's the only way we can only see and mitigate global emission standards. Would oil and gas vanish the next 20, 40 years? No, that's not possible. Why? Because we do not have sufficient energy resource in the world to support global growth. So think about it today. We're using oil, gas, coal, everything, and yet most of Africa do not have electricity. Same with some parts of Asia. So if you're saying get rid of coal, get rid of oil, how are we going to power the world? So I think something's got to give. I think it's all negotiations, but more importantly for me, African leadership needs to go to the table having in mind, we have a very youthful population in Africa, and the youthful population of Africa demands global standards today. See, if you think about the youths of Africa 40, 50 years ago, they were not that interlined with the global standards. But all of a sudden, mobile telephony changed that. And with mobile telephony, the kid in Accra, the young man in Abuja, the young man in Harare gets the same information on demand. So Africa is changing. So leadership of African nations must understand that news travels faster than you can imagine now. So you cannot fool people. As they say, you can fool people sometimes, but you can't fool them all the time. They will find you out. So leadership must come to bear to make sure African standards and ways of life are protected. And that, by so doing, we can only arrive at the right juncture in working. My view in general about the pandemic vis-a-vis the oil and gas sector is this. The pandemic has brought about global focus to how industry should run and how this industry should operate, but also how we should prepare ourselves next times for other emergency situations that requires emergency answers. And so doing, African oil companies have been resilient. They've been able to maneuver and position themselves well to delivering and keeping the taps running, oil flowing, and African economies like Nigeria moving. Albeit slowly, but surely we'll get there.